Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen. And can you imagine your internet going off for half an hour? I know most of the younger people watching us would go absolutely insane. Well, imagine an entire country's internet being cut off. Well, that very thing happened in Mauritania, where a submarine internet cable was cut, and no one knows why or how it was cut, though Sierra Leone's government appears to have interfered with its citizens' internet access around that time. And it's really concerning, to say the least, because we've talked with different people about it before. The power grid in many places like the United States, for example, it's about 50-something years out of date, and it's crumbling. It's crumbling infrastructure, and you can imagine what can happen if the internet goes down, how that can affect different people. We saw what happened in Puerto Rico some months ago after the hurricane, and all this money had to be flown in from planes. It's usually helicopter money, but this time it had to be airplanes because people couldn't use the ATMs, etc. John, can you go into what's going on here?
Yeah, well, I consider myself actually somewhat of an expert on telecom because I'm a telecom technician. 15 years, unfortunately, I've been in the trade. I actually have been, laying underwater cable, not undersea cable, but I laid underwater cables. I done tons of different infrastructure, from fiber to copper to coax. So I kind of see and can understand the problems and issues that could be made by cutting some of these lines. Of course, there's multiple lines that are supposed to be the backbone, controlling. If one get cut, there's going to be another one. And then usually you have several different routes to secure. If one goes down, the other one could pick up, whatever slack it is on the bandwidth. Now, there is, of course, issues here, because what could happen if somebody just goes and cuts most of the main lines that goes under the Atlantic? You'll cut off most of the communication between Europe and North America, for example.
Yeah, and as we see on this map, France, Portugal, Canary Islands, Spain, Mauritania, Mali, Niger. I mean, there's so many examples all the way down to South Africa, and that would be a massive problem for people in all of those countries.
Of course it would, and if you take a look at another map here as well, you can see all the infrastructure that are built into North America, into the United States, with all these fiber optical and copper cables running all the way underneath the sea. You have, of course, a cable that you could see up in Iceland and so on. Now, we need to talk about, of course, the infrastructure that's dilapidating a lot of places, even in places especially rural, which makes it harder for people living rurally. And they, of course, focus mostly on the cities because they want to. I think there's probably an agenda behind it, pushing the infrastructure updates away from the rural areas, of course, and keeping it mostly in the cities. So people are forced to move to the cities. In order to have competitive businesses, you need a good internet connection. Today, everybody is on the internet. Everybody's communicating with everyone. So it's very important for people to have that connection. And then if, it's very easy to sabotage anyone with, this is just the undersea cables. Talk about, the main trunks going from province to province in Canada and other places. There's a lot of problems with a lot of things. And of course, there's several countries that, started on one infrastructure, like copper, for example, which is, Norway, a lot of Scandinavian countries. You also have Great Britain, and a lot of Europe was on copper. Well, they were struggling, but of course, some countries chose to do a free market solution to it, which Norway was one of them, surprisingly enough, being so freaking socialist. They started to have internet companies competing with each other on providing internet. And I think that's the future. But again, we're very vulnerable when it comes to that. And we're talking about the electrical infrastructure and solar flare that could hit as well. So there's lots of different things.
Yeah, and it's really important to wrap this up into a point here, because obviously we see a lot of centralization from government monopolization over the power infrastructure throughout the world, really, and little incentive for the free market to really grow and adapt and create new solutions. And that's why, for example, in the United States, we have this 50-something-year-old electrical infrastructure which can go down.
Grid.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's insane. You'd think things would adapt over time, especially as technology has advanced so much, which is why we talk so much about decentralization, because decentralization doesn't just mean ruling, doesn't just mean money. It means a lot of different things, and that includes innovations, technologies, and we get a lot of messages and comments about, well, if the internet goes offline, what'll happen to Bitcoin? You won't be able to spend it. And I'm sure if the entire world's internet goes down and there's a huge revolution, the last thing we'll be thinking about is our own wealth. It'll be about survival, and wealth does play into that, where gold and silver comes in. But of course, there are so many people innovating on the free market already, off the grid, trying to create new marvels and innovations when it comes to something like cryptocurrency and being able to use it off the grid. And we've seen a lot of examples of that. Dash Digital Group is trying to put something together right now that I've been seeing headlines for. I'm not going to go into it until I know the full scale of it, but there's a lot of decentralized ideas coming into play here, because the market is growing despite the bloodbath we've seen in recent days in the cryptocurrency market. It's a correction short term. It's a long-term bull market when you consider the vast amount of things that haven't been tapped into yet. And that is technology on the free market really starting to grow. And we will see decentralization, but the more the government gets involved in this kind of field, the more we're going to see these monopolies, the less innovation we're going to see, and the more, basically there's a big wall standing in between us and the future. And instead, the government is trying to centralize it in a sense where it has more control over us, because that is the whole point of government, is control over the individual. And the individual needs to break free from that and have control over themselves, rule themselves, and create new amazing things that can cure diseases, that can really solve so many of the world's problems, including the problems involving the electrical grid. John?
Yeah, well, I'm just going to make one final point, and it's been on my mind. I talk about it a lot with my family, especially my dad. He's in the telecom sector as well. We talk about how can we decentralize the telecommunication networking, because now it's two central nodes, 99% of all the traffic. We need to figure out ways to create mesh networks, not just with wirelessly, because also wirelessly, you got to remember there's health factors when it comes to especially the rollout of the new 5G system. With I look at the wattage outputs and all that, how it affects your body, because that's where I came from, my background. And also what we need to do is we need to figure out ways to create really highly, greatly secure, completely privatized networks. And I think a proposal from me would be to have local communities create their own internet providers, and instead of relying on these garbage companies. I call them garbage companies because that's what they are, these big duopolies that we have here in Manitoba, for example,
Canada.
It's just ridiculous. Why can't we just start to work at a decentralized level and create tons upon tons of decentralized grids, instead of having this massive? Because when you have a centralized node, it's very easy for the CSIC or NSA or whichever intelligence agency just to put a little Ethernet cable into one of the main nodes and then drag all the information out of that, all the traffic, everything, and control. Well, that's what the NSA does, Josh, right? It's just sucking up all the information. So I think we need to move to a world where we can decentralize communication. And that's the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many people will say, well, privatize, well, then we might get charged for it. And on the free market, things go down in prices. People compete for the best price and the best product, etc., which a lot of people just overlook. But it's also important to mention that you don't have a right to other people's labor. People labor in order to create the product. And when people labor to create the product, you're basically saying they're a slave if you want it for free. That they are doing all of this just to be extorted for their product and told that they don't get any money for the fruits of their labor and everything. And that is one of the greatest examples of a lot of misinformation within the public, is that it's fair to steal people's money if you're a government as an organized crime racket and give it to other people. It's not fair as an individual to work hard to create something that is of value to other people and can solve so many problems and can go down in price as more people enter the market and innovate on the idea, and that is somehow unfair. How is it unfair for individuals to try and create great things that make humanity one step further to true innovation innovation and freedom, etc. So I think that's one of the more ridiculous examples that we see in mainstream public, is that, you know, it was a great example with net neutrality and a whole bunch of other things, is that
which
you have
ties into what we were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. That you have the right to the fruits of someone else's labor, which is absolutely absurd. So you're against slavery, right? Everyone's against slavery. We're against what happened in the South and in the North. The history books don't really tell you about that, with black slaves for so many years. But for some reason, it's okay for you to be a slave if it means that you don't want to have to pay for something and you want it to just be given to you. Of course, a big part of this comes down to independence of the individual, and that is where all these decentralized alternatives come in. That's where we have alternative internets, alternative power grids, alternative everything, including ways to cure diseases instead of one centralized source that has no incentive to do good, to provide a good product, but instead is subject to just making a whole bunch of money out of nothing because it's being stolen from the populace and handed to them regardless of the good or bad that they do.
Yeah, just one last thing. If you want free internet, go to North Korea.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, that's a great example, and I think we will finish it off there. There are a lot of problems with the power grid. It's outdated, and that is because it's a government-run system across the board. Corporatism, if anything, government control over corporation and monopolization of corporations, it's another bubble that's going to burst, and it just comes down to us as individuals to come up with the free market solutions.
Yeah, don't let the government touch the infrastructure. They say that, the infrastructure needs to be regulated and controlled by the government. That's bullshit. Let's get away from government interference, and let's create decentralization of power. Think about that. Power decentralization and telecom decentralization could really change the world drastically.
Sounds like Tesla. Anyway, thanks for going into this with us, John, and until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth,
Be the change.
Like what you see here, WAM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so overwhelmingly demonetized and censored by YouTube as the ADL comes in and flags all of our content as hate speech. Also, check our Bitcoin address in the description as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And also find us at steemit.com at Josh Sigurdson, the future of social media, where you get paid in the upvote of your post in Steem, the cryptocurrency. And also find us at the Red Pill Expo, which we have a reference link for below in the description and the comments as well. Hosted by G. Edward Griffin, amazing speakers coming out to speak this year. Don't miss it. It's in Spokane, Washington, June 21st to 23rd. We hope to see you there. But until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.